Your position has been made redundant. The words were clipped, sterile, delivered from across a desk that was too new and too clean. My name is Frank Miller. I am 48 years old, and for 15 years, I ran the second shift at the Northwood Distribution Center. I didn't just manage it, I kept its heart beating in the dark while the rest of the city slept. The official reason was redundancy. The real reason was the smirking 20-something I saw my new manager showing around my office an hour later, his cousin. They thought they were just deleting a line item on a budget. They had no idea I was the one who wrote the code. For a man who spent his nights orchestrating the movement of 10,000 pallets, my own life was a study in stillness. One wife, one house, one job. For 15 years, the rhythm of my life was the low hum of conveyor belts and the hiss of pneumatic lifts. I was a logistics coordinator. To most people, that sounds like a man with a clipboard. But to the men and women on my shift, it meant I was the one who made sense of the chaos. When the day shift left a tangled mess of mislabeled freight and impossible deadlines, I was the one who untangled it. It was a puzzle, a massive, three-dimensional game of chess played with forklifts and shipping manifests, and I was good at it. My competence wasn't loud. It lived in the quiet satisfaction of a clean floor at sunrise, every truck loaded, every order accounted for. It lived in the trust of my crew, who knew that I would never ask them to do something I couldn't do myself, and that I always had their back. My foundation was built on order, on the simple, powerful belief that if you did the work right, the results would speak for themselves. I never sought conflict. I believed in the system. That was my mistake. The system changed when Mark Jensen arrived. He was 35, with a master's in business administration from a school I could not afford and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was the new regional operations manager, sent from corporate to optimize synergies, whatever that meant. I knew what it meant. It meant he was here to break things he did not understand. He toured the facility on my second night under his command. He walked through the aisles not like a man trying to learn, but like a landlord inspecting a property for flaws. He held a tablet, tapping at it with a stylus as he spoke. "This is all very analog, Frank," he said, gesturing vaguely at the central dispatch board, a massive whiteboard where I tracked critical shipments with colored markers. A system I had perfected over a decade. "It works," I said. "The crew can see the whole floor's status at a glance. No logins, no dead batteries." He gave a small, dismissive laugh. "We have software for this, real-time analytics." "The cloud," he said, the cloud like it was a holy kingdom he was personally inviting me to enter. "Your handwritten logs," he continued, pointing at the row of black, leather-bound notebooks on my desk shelf. "What are those for?" "Contingencies," I replied. "Maintenance schedules, quirks in the sorting machines, notes on recurring issues with certain carriers. If the network goes down, we don't stop." "The network doesn't go down," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He looked at me then, truly looked at me for the first time. I saw in his eyes what he saw, a relic, a part of the old machinery that needed to be replaced with something sleeker, cheaper, and more obedient. He didn't see a master of the craft, he saw a cost. He saw a man who had been in one place for too long, a man who was, in his world, standing still. And in his world, if you were standing still, you were falling behind. The meeting was 2 weeks later. It was short. He did not invite me to sit down. "Frank," he began, leaning back in his chair, the picture of casual power, "we appreciate your years of service. However, as we move toward a more data-driven management model, we've decided to restructure the night shift leadership. Your position has been made redundant." Redundant, a word designed to remove the human element. "You are not being fired. A line of code is being deleted." I stood there, my hands at my sides. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the same focus I got when a truck full of hazardous materials was leaking on the loading dock. Panic is useless. You assess the situation, you identify the threat, you act. "I understand," I said. My voice was even. I think it disappointed him. He was braced for an argument, for a plea. I gave him nothing. It was like he was a child who had kicked a dog, expecting it to yelp, but it just stared back at him, unblinking. "Human Resources will email you the details of your severance package," he said, already looking back at his monitor. "You can collect your personal items. Security will escort you." Dismissed. I walked back to my office. Two of my crew, Dave and Maria, saw me and started to walk over, their faces creased with concern. I just gave a slight shake of my head and they stopped. They knew. Pete, the security guard, a man I'd shared a thermos of coffee with 1,000 times, looked like he was about to apologize. "It's all right, Pete," I said quietly. "You've got a job to do." I packed my things into a small cardboard box. The coffee mug my wife had given me, a picture of our daughter, and from the shelf I took the 15 leather-bound notebooks. My entire career, my expertise, my knowledge, distilled into ink on paper. As Pete walked me toward the exit, I saw Mark Jensen walking back toward my office. With him was a young man, no older than 25, wearing a polo shirt that was too tight and a self-satisfied grin. I recognized him from a family photo on Mark's desk, his cousin. Mark was clapping him on the back, laughing, pointing into the office that had been mine for over a decade. He was giving him a tour of his new domain. That was the moment the anger finally came. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage. It was cold. It was deliberate. It was the feeling of a switch being flipped deep inside me. The betrayal wasn't just corporate. It wasn't just a layoff. It was a theft. He had taken my work, my dedication, my 15 years of loyalty, and handed it to his family as a gift. He had not just dismissed me. He had erased me, all for the sake of petty nepotism. He looked over and saw me watching. He didn't even have the decency to look away. He just gave me that same empty smile. A final, silent confirmation of his contempt. In that moment, he and I both knew the truth, but he believed his truth was the only one that mattered. I drove home in silence. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the sunrise I had seen after every shift, the quiet signal of a job well done. But today, it just felt like a spotlight on a hollow space in my life. I walked into my house. My wife Carol was in the kitchen. She saw the box in my hands and the look on my face, and she knew. She didn't say a word, she just wrapped her arms around me. For 2 days, I did nothing. I sat in my study, the box on the floor next to me. I felt the weight of 15 years pressing down. It's a strange feeling to have the central pillar of your life kicked out from under you. You feel yourself start to collapse. You question the whole structure. What was it all for? The extra hours, the missed dinners, the quiet pride in a job no one outside those walls understood. All of it undone in a 3-minute meeting by a man who valued a blood relation over a lifetime of competence. On the third day, I opened the box. I took out the notebooks and lined them up on my desk, 15 of them. I opened the most recent one. The handwriting was neat, precise. I ran my finger over the entries. October 12th. Sorting machine 3, belt slipping under heavy load. Maintenance call logged, number 774B day shift supervisor bypassed my lockout tagout to clear a jam. Spoke to him. He was dismissive, second time this month. This is how someone loses a hand. October 18th. LTL freight from Vexcom, arrived 2 hours late, manifest incorrect. Driver pressured us to sign off anyway, refused. Found 3 pallets of unlabeled chemical solvents hidden behind medical supplies, documented with photos. Mark Jensen was notified via email at 9:14 p.m., no response. November 3rd. Mandatory overtime pushed the crew to 14-hour shifts, 3 nights in a row. Time sheets were adjusted by corporate before payroll. Dave shorted 6 hours. Maria shorted 7. Filed a formal complaint with HR on their behalf. Was told it was a clerical error that would be investigated. It never was. I closed the book. This wasn't just a log. It was a record. It was a history of negligence, of corners cut, of profits valued over people. I had recorded these things not as a weapon, but as a shield. I did it to protect my crew, to have a factual basis for my arguments, to maintain the order that Mark Jensen and the people before him were so willing to sacrifice for an extra point on a quarterly report. They saw these practices as the cost of doing business. I saw them as a debt being accrued, a debt of risk, of liability, of broken trust, and they had just fired the one man who knew exactly how to call it in. The anger was still there, cold and hard inside my chest, but now it had a purpose. It was no longer the helpless anger of a victim. It was the focused energy of a builder. They had torn down my structure. Now I would use the same blueprints to deconstruct theirs, piece by piece. I spent the rest of the day going through the notebooks, cross-referencing entries with old emails I had forwarded to my personal account. I built a timeline. A story, not of my firing, but of the systemic rot inside that company. The dismissive arrogance of a manager like Mark Jensen wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It was the inevitable result of a culture that punished integrity and rewarded shortcuts. When I was done, I had a 12-page document. It was precise, factual, and backed by 15 years of meticulous evidence. It detailed safety violations, labor law infringements, and potential transportation department infractions. Every claim was tied to a date, a time, and a specific shipment. It was irrefutable, but evidence is useless without a voice. I thought about who could give it that voice. An anonymous tip to a government agency was an option, but that was slow, uncertain. I needed something with impact, something public. That's when I remembered Sarah Jenkins. No relation to Mark, thankfully. She had worked in our warehouse for a year, right out of college, to save up money. She was smart, quiet, and she saw everything. She left to go into journalism. I remembered her telling me she wanted to write stories that mattered, stories about people like us, the ones who do the work but never get the credit. I found her online. She was an investigative reporter for a major local news outlet. Her bio said she specialized in corporate accountability and labor issues. I read a few of her articles. They were sharp, well-researched, and ruthless. She was the one. I sent her an email. The subject line was simple: 15 years at the Northwood Distribution Center. In the body, I wrote only 3 sentences. My name is Frank Miller. I was the second shift coordinator there until last week. I have something you need to see. I attached the 12-page document and hit send. The response came less than an hour later. Mr. Miller, can you meet me tomorrow morning? Name the time and place. We met at a small, independent coffee shop halfway between our homes. It was neutral territory. I got there first, found a table in the back corner. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. She hadn't changed much. She had the same intelligent, watchful eyes. She carried herself with a new confidence, though. Frank, she said, extending a hand, it's been a long time. Sarah, I replied, shaking it. Thanks for coming. Thank you for sending that document, she said, getting straight to the point as she sat down. I read it 3 times. If even half of this is provable, it's not just a story. It's a bombshell. It's all provable, I said. I slid one of the black notebooks across the table. This is one of 15. They're all like this. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages. I could see the moment she understood. Her professional skepticism gave way to a focused intensity. She wasn't just looking at a source's notes anymore. She was looking at the bedrock of a case. She saw the same thing I did, a pattern. Why now, Frank? She asked, finally looking up. You had this for years. Why bring it forward now? It was a fair question, the Allies' test of faith. She needed to know my motivation. Was this just a disgruntled employee seeking revenge? Because they fired me to give my job to the manager's cousin, I said, my voice low and even. They called my life's work redundant and gave it away as a party favor. For years, I used this information to protect my crew from the inside. I tried to make the system work. Now, I'm on the outside. The only way to protect them, to see any kind of justice, is to make the system accountable for what it is. I was not just a plot device to her, and she was not just a tool to me. Her motivation became clear in her next words. My father worked at a plant like that for 20 years, she said, a flicker of something hard in her eyes. They laid him off 2 years before he could get his full pension. Said his whole department was being automated. A month later, they hired younger guys for less money to do the same job. This isn't just a story for me, Frank, it's personal. She closed the notebook and slid it back to me. Okay, she said. Her voice was steady, a co-conspirator locking into the plan. I'm in, but we have to be smart. They will have lawyers, public relations teams, everything. Your logs are the foundation. We need to build the rest of the case. We need to talk to other employees, past and present. We need to corroborate everything. A new front-end employee, one of the few I knew was still loyal, sent me a text message an hour later. Mark's in a panic. Rumors of an inquiry. He's ordered all old paper logs and maintenance records from the last 5 years shredded. By end of week, I showed the message to Sarah. Her eyes narrowed. He's covering his tracks. That's our ticking clock. He's not just destroying records. He's creating a cover-up. That makes the story even bigger. She looked at me, a grim smile on her face. He thinks he's erasing the evidence. He doesn't know you are the evidence. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was not just anger, it was power. The hidden, specialized power of a man who knew the truth. Mark Jensen held the hierarchical power. He had the title, the office, the authority, but I held the operational reality in my hands. The climax of this story would be the moment my hidden power became manifest, shattering his. He had failed to value my competence, and now, that very competence would become the instrument of his downfall. Let's get to work, I said. The next 2 weeks were a blur of methodical, clandestine activity. We operated like a two-person insurgency. Sarah, with her journalistic training, knew how to build a case that would stand up to scrutiny. I, with my 15 years of institutional knowledge, knew where all the bodies were buried. We were a perfect team. My quiet competence, once confined to the four walls of a warehouse, was now weaponized. We worked out of my study. The walls were covered in whiteboards, my precise handwriting now mapping out a network of connections, timelines, and evidence chains. It looked like a logistics plan, but instead of tracking pallets, we were tracking corporate malfeasance. Sarah called it the war room. "Okay, Frank," she'd say, pointing to an entry in one of my logs. November 3rd, the overtime discrepancy. "You have the names Dave and Maria. We need to talk to them, but we can't spook them. Mark will be watching everyone." I knew how to reach them. I didn't call, I didn't text. I went to the diner where the second shift guys grabbed breakfast after work. I sat in a booth and waited. Sure enough, half an hour later, Dave walked in. When he saw me, his face broke into a relieved grin. "Frank. Man, it's not the same without you," he said, sliding into the booth. "The kid is clueless. He almost had someone drive a forklift into a stack of hazmat yesterday." "I'm sorry to hear that, Dave," I said. "Listen, I need to ask you something. It's important, and it needs to stay between us." I asked him about the overtime. His expression darkened. "Yeah, I remember. They said it was a glitch. Funny how the glitches always work in their favor." Sarah had prepared me for this. "What if I told you it wasn't a glitch? What if I told you it happened to at least a dozen people on our shift that same month?" I showed him a list of names I had compiled from my logs. His eyes went wide. He wasn't just a guy who got shorted anymore. He was part of a pattern. "I have my pay stubs," he said, his voice low. "I keep everything." That was the key. Sarah called it human corroboration. My logs were the map, but the testimony of people like Dave was the destination. We met with Maria next at a park near her daughter's school. Then a retired forklift operator named Gus, who confirmed the stories about disabling safety governors on the machines to make them run faster. Each conversation was a quiet act of rebellion. These were good people who had been made to feel powerless for years. By showing them they weren't alone, we were giving them their power back. They were no longer isolated incidents. They were a class action of silent dissent. The midpoint complication, Mark's order to shred the records, turned into a gift. Sarah filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the state's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, for all safety audits and complaints at the Northwood facility for the last 5 years. When parts of the official record came back suspiciously blank or incomplete, it corroborated the cover-up. Mark's panic had created a new, provable offense. His arrogance was making our case for us. During this time, a moment of doubt washed over me. I was sitting in my study late one night, staring at the whiteboards. The web of arrows and names and dates felt immense, heavy. This wasn't just about getting back at Mark Jensen anymore. This was going to bring a world of hurt down on the company. Fines, lawsuits. The stock price would probably take a hit. People who had nothing to do with this, people on other shifts in other departments, might lose their jobs in the fallout. Was this right? Was I so consumed by my own sense of injustice that I was willing to potentially burn the whole building down, metaphorically speaking? The anger had been a clean, simple fuel, but this feeling was more complex. It was the weight of consequence. Carol came in and stood behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I'm just wondering if this is the right thing to do," I confessed. "It feels destructive." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Frank, for 15 years you went to work and you fixed things. You made sure people were safe. You made sure the job was done right. You believed that if you poured integrity into your work, the company would honor it. They didn't, they threw it away. What you're doing now, she said, her grip tightening on my shoulder, is the same thing you've always done. You're fixing a broken system. The only difference is this time you're doing it from the outside. Don't doubt your own integrity now. It's all you've ever had. Her words steadied me. She was right. This wasn't just a tactic. It was a moral choice. I was moving from passive tolerance of a broken system to a deliberate act of restoring order. The destruction was a necessary byproduct of a much-needed correction. The plan came together in 3 waves, designed for maximum impact. Wave 1 was Sarah's story. She had it ready to go, a masterpiece of investigative journalism, complete with on-the-record quotes from former employees, redacted copies of my logs, and expert analysis on the potential legal ramifications. Wave 2 was the official complaints. I had used my knowledge to draft 2 separate, devastatingly detailed reports, one for the State Labor Board focusing on the wage theft, the other for OSHA focusing on the safety violations. They were written in the dry, technical language of the bureaucracy, a language I knew they would understand. They were anonymous, but they pointed Sarah's soon-to-be-published article out as containing supporting evidence. Wave 3 was my personal touch. I knew the company's shipping schedule by heart. I knew their biggest clients. One of them was a major medical supply company, a firm whose entire brand was built on reliability and public trust. A quiet, anonymous package containing a summary of my findings, specifically highlighting the mislabeling of sensitive shipments and the risks to their supply chain, would be sent to their head of logistics. "It's time," Sarah said one evening, looking at the finished article on her laptop. "We publish tomorrow at 6 a.m. The complaints get filed electronically at the same time. The package to the medical company is already in the mail. It's all synchronized." The night before the story broke was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my living room, watching the clock. This was it, the moment my hidden power would become manifest. I felt like I was back on the loading dock just before the first truck of the night shift arrived. A moment of perfect, calm potential before the chaos began. At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Sarah's article was live. The headline was stark. Inside NORTHWOD. WHISTLEBLOWERS allege years of wage theft and dangerous conditions at local distribution giant. The story was a sledgehammer. It was all there, laid out in sober, undeniable detail. My notebooks formed the spine of the narrative. Dave's and Maria's stories of wage theft were there. Gus's account of the disabled safety features was there. The shredding of documents. The nepotism, and then there was the humanizing flaw in the antagonist. Sarah had dug up an article about a speech Mark had given at his business school alumni event. He talked about the brutal pressure of the logistics industry and the need for ruthless efficiency to satisfy shareholders. It wasn't an excuse, but it provided a glimpse into the mindset. He wasn't just evil. He was a product of a system that saw human beings as variables in an equation of profit and loss. A system he was too arrogant and insecure to question. The first call came at 6:45 a.m. It was Dave. "Frank. I'm reading it. Oh my God, Frank, you did it. You actually did it." He sounded like he couldn't believe it. The real pandemonium began around 9 a.m. That's when the Labor Board and OSHA inspectors, armed with my detailed reports and Sarah's article, would have arrived at the warehouse for their surprise inspections. I could picture the scene perfectly. The day shift in full swing. And then, the arrival of men and women in official jackets, holding clipboards, shutting down sorting lines, and demanding access to records that Mark had already tried to destroy. The public humiliation was exquisite. It was happening not in a private boardroom, but on the floor of the warehouse, in front of the very people whose competence Mark had scorned. His authority, built on a foundation of bluster and titles, would evaporate in the face of true, regulatory power. By noon, the story was the lead on every local news website. A television crew was parked outside the gates of the Northwood facility. Corporate headquarters, which had ignored my internal complaints for years, was forced to issue a statement. "We are taking these allegations very seriously and have launched an immediate internal investigation. The manager of the Northwood facility has been placed on administrative leave." Placed on leave, the first crack in the dam. But the final, poetic justice came from the place Mark would least expect it. It came from the very system of logistics he claimed to have mastered. The package I sent to the medical supply company arrived at 10 a.m. Their head of logistics, a man whose entire career depended on supply chain integrity, would have read my report. He would have seen the evidence of his company's sterile products being shipped on the same trucks as mislabeled, leaking chemical solvents. He would have understood the catastrophic brand risk. At 3 p.m. that day, the medical company announced it was immediately suspending its multi-million-dollar contract with the distribution center, pending a full audit of their safety and handling procedures. That was the killing blow. It wasn't just bad press anymore. It was a direct, massive hit to the bottom line. It was the kind of thing that got executives fired, and it did. The next day, the company announced that Mark Jensen's employment had been terminated. His cousin, the one who had taken my job, was also let go. There was a fleeting moment as I read the news where I imagined Mark. I saw him sitting in his office for the last time, not as a conqueror but as a failure. And in that moment of realization, I knew he would finally understand. He wasn't defeated by a vengeful ex-employee. He was defeated by a system he was too arrogant to see. He was defeated by the meticulous, handwritten logs he had dismissed as analog. He was defeated by the very integrity and competence he had failed to value. His own negligence had become the instrument of his downfall. The victory was not just in his defeat, it was in what came next. In the following months, the company, under intense scrutiny, was forced to overhaul its entire regional operation. They paid millions in back wages and fines. They instituted new, verifiable safety protocols. The seeds of order I had planted had finally borne fruit, and I didn't go back. I took the severance money, the small amount they had offered me, and I started my own consulting firm, Miller Logistics Solutions. My first client was a local manufacturing company that had heard about what happened. They wanted someone to audit their systems, to find the flaws before they became liabilities. They wanted someone who understood that efficiency and integrity were not opposing forces, but two sides of the same coin. I was building something new, something better on my own terms. My legacy wouldn't be 15 years in the dark of a warehouse. It would be a new standard of doing business, built on the quiet strength of a man who knew the value of getting the details right.